Okay, fine.
Ciao a tutte le ascoltatrici e a tutti gli ascoltatori di Radio Quar, sono Salvatore e ben ritrovati ad una nuova puntata di Music in a Box. Riprendiamo dopo l'estate con una puntata veramente speciale dedicata ad un gruppo che da queste parti amiamo tantissimo. Infatti con me c'è Alberto. Ciao Alberto.
Ciao a tutti.
So che sei un po' emozionato perché intervistiamo una delle tue band preferite di sempre, ovvero dici tu il nome.
I Codeine.
Allora li vado a presentare. I Codeine sono nella storia della musica indipendente americana degli anni 90 e si sono formati a New York nel 1989 grazie a Stephen Immerwahr, Chris Brokaw e John Engle. Il terzetto ha influenzato più o meno decine e decine di gruppi che sono nati dopo l'uscita di Frigid Stars e White Birch, rispettivamente usciti nel 1990 e nel 1994, senza dimenticare che in mezzo c'è stato l'EP Barely Real, pubblicato nel 1993. La musica della band, che si era nel frattempo spostata però a Chicago, aveva ben strutturato la sua musica su un concetto di essenzialità, suoni rallentati e dilatati. Tutta la musica dei Codeine confluisce in un'esperienza toccante e sorprendente. Non c'è nulla di fragile nei suoni della band, ma c'è qualcosa di completamente diverso, un'atmosfera cupa e drammatica dove tutto sembra crollare. Non per niente i Codeine poi hanno fatto una cover dei Joy Division di Atmosphere pubblicato nella raccolta When I See the Sun, e dopo quasi 30 anni di silenzio la label Numero Group recupera il materiale registrato nel 1992 presso il Dessau Studio di New York, e l'album dal titolo proprio di Dessau è composto da 8 brani scartati ai tempi di Frigid Stars. Dessau è un compendio della musica dei Codeine che, ritornati nella formazione originale, si esibiranno in 10 concerti in Europa e a sostegno proprio dell'album. E in questo loro tour suoneranno a Bologna il 5 settembre al Locomotive. E dopo questa lunga presentazione io e Alberto siamo orgogliosi e felici di ospitare Stephen Immerwahr e John Engle. Hi Stephen and hi John.
Hello.
Good morning.
Welcome to Radio Quar and thank you for being here with me and Alberto.
Thank you for having us.
And let's start with the first question. Here we are 10 years later with a new album. What is the feeling that prevails in you on the eve on this European tour?
I think for Bologna in 1994 we played, or maybe 1993 we played with Doug Sharon, and it was not a great show, or at least I did not enjoy it. But when we came back to Bologna in 2012 and played at Locomotive, it really was a special thing. I really enjoyed the show a great deal, and I think 30 years ago, I was very anxious, fearful, self-involved. 10 years ago, I was more open to the experience, and this time I cannot believe it, but I'm looking forward to playing shows.
Okay.
Okay.
And what about you, John?
I'm just very happy to be going back to Italy because I love Italy.
And so, and the question is for both of you. So, who wants to answer can start. But what have you done in all these years? Did you always keep in touch with Chris and did you too?
We've always, Steve and I haven't played, mostly since the end of Codeine. But we've remained friends and in touch. And Chris has been playing constantly since we broke up in '94. And so we see him from time to time. And he would just say to us occasionally, "Oh, people are always asking about Codeine. They would love it if we played some shows." And when the box set came out in 2012, um, we decided, well, if there is a box set coming out, we should really play. And it was just intended to be a handful of shows, and that would be it. And so we thought, well, we've played enough. That's fine. And I think in the last, couple of years, especially with the release of this record, uh, we just thought, oh, well, we have another record. We could even go out and play some more. So that's really just what we've decided to do, to get back once again into the van and tour around. However, we all have things that we do otherwise. So this is just very limited as well.
Okay. Stephen?
Yeah, so when we stopped playing in '94, for the most part, that was like the end of me playing. I ended up playing bass in a few bands, for which was enjoyable, but no real kind of music of my own. I've been really impressed with Chris Brokaw's. Just he's made a living as a musician, which is not an easy thing to do, and maybe one of the reasons why I haven't continued to be a musician over the last 30 years. So these days I work for the New York City Department of Health doing statistics, and I'm very happy to be a civil servant.
Mhm.
Okay. And Stephen, John, can you tell us how the opportunity or choice came about? I mean, the circumstances that lead to the publication of the SAU.
Yeah, well, I think that the initial impetus really was the Numero group. So Ken Shipley and Rob Severe, who have been real supporters of Codeine since the reissues in 2012, and always, they are record people. They're always looking for angles, for things to put out, and they sent us a tape of the 1992 recordings and said, "Hey, we would love to put these out. What's the problem?" And in 1992 there was many things going on, and we needed to keep moving. And Chris left the band. I was unhappy with the recordings, and but then here it is, 30 years, almost, not quite 30 years later, and I'm listening to the tape in a very different way, listening to the tape in a different way. And 30 years ago, one of the barriers to the record was not just the recording. Maybe the recording was the most important thing for me, but I really wanted to have this painting, The White Birch by Thomas Wilmer Dewing, on the cover of the record. But back then there were not high resolution scans of paintings on the internet that you could easily use. We had to write to ask for permission for a photo, and they replied and said no. Then I was not happy with the recordings, and But now it's 30 years later. There are scans of the record of the image. I listened to it in a different way, and yeah, I was like, there's lots of strengths to this recording that I hadn't listened to or hadn't noticed back then.
Back then, Steve was noticing other things. Can I tell them, Steve?
Sure.
Steve kept on saying there are these high-pitched frequencies he could hear that no one else could. But Steve maintained that these frequencies were there on the record, and none of us could hear them. And I don't know if Steve still hears these frequencies on the record, but if he does, he's decided it's not something that would keep the record from being put out. But at the time in '92, Chris and I just thought, well, this is good. This will be a good second record. And Steve just said he didn't want that record to be put out. And most of the songs, as you know, were re-recorded either for the White Birch 2 years later, or we included a few of the songs on Barely Real, which was an EP, a 6-song EP that we put out. So we ended up using most of those songs in one form or another, but the originals were just unheard until last year.
Mhm. So the question and the curiosity is, how satisfied are you with how the record sounds right now? So does it meet your expectation? Because I'm asking because I read in an article published on The Guardian a few days ago. I remember that it was something that Steve said that was maybe my standards were maybe inhuman at that time.
Yeah, I think my standards were unrealistic.
Okay.
The record, listening to the record now, I think it exists in a way in relationship to other recordings of those songs and to the rest of the kind of trajectory of Codeine in a way that it didn't then. I actually really like the sound of the record, this album, and I think some of the tempos they're less extreme than the White Birch, which I don't think is a bad thing. I think some of the tempos are more moderate and maybe making it a little easier to listen to. I love the sounds that Mike McMacken got. He's just an excellent engineer, and he did the Frigid Stars LP, which I really like the sound of. He did I think a really nice job with Dessau too. It really was not a question of the engineering, but yeah, I'm not just more kind of forgiving and hopefully a little bit more compassionate as a person, but also more forgiving of kind of maybe shortcomings of the record that I heard then that really bothered me and don't bother me now. I really like the sound of the record, and I'm really happy that it's come out.
Okay.
It's the same as you, John?
Oh yeah. Well, as I said, at the time that we initially recorded it, sounded fine to me.
Okay.
And yeah, it still sounds fine. And yes, the tempos that we had for the songs in 1992 were quicker than the tempos 18 months later, or however long it was, which you can definitely hear, especially on the song C. The probably the difference is I'm trying to think, maybe not in terms of, BPMs, beats per minute, but it's a significant difference. And the 1994 tempos were rather unforgiving. So I do like the 1992 tempos.
Okay.
And John, Stephen, how did the first dates in the USA go? Both as audience engagement and as the three of you get along on stage?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
How did the first dates in the USA?
Well, we've only played 3 shows. We played a 20th anniversary show for Numero, which was the first thing that got us to start playing. And then just before we flew out to LA to play that show, we haven't done anything. We haven't played in the last 10 years. So we decided to have 2 little warm-up shows at a place we like very much in Brooklyn, which is also very small. And the main thing was we were on a very tiny wooden stage. And it was a little bit of a shock to be playing again. And the shows went very well. We were very pleased. And then out in LA, it was a little bit of a different, it wasn't quite as intimate and small, and larger stages, they totally different sound. But it was always, as always, very, very nice to be playing those songs again. And it does take a little practice. I like to say that a family member has said to me what they said 10 years ago when we were playing. At this point, I guess it's 11 years ago. And she said, "Oh, it's a good thing your music is so slow, so you won't have to really spend that much time learning to play it." And I said, you might think that, but it's rather hard to get back up on a very slow bicycle. You have to. There's a skill to learning to play with 2 other people very slowly. So it did take a bit of practice till we felt that we were Codeine again. But we are.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And what about the set list that you're going to play? They're going to change night by night, or do you find some sort of set that fits all the concerts and sounds well together?
I think last time we played, we stuck to one set list. We may have made a few changes, but we're not trying to surprise ourselves. We just want to get the set settled before we think about changing something here and there.
Yeah, yeah, I remember thinking like, oh my God, I can't believe bands would play the same songs over and over in the same order. That just seems so ridiculous. But
yeah,
there actually is some merit to it. I've come to feel, and part of it is just like I don't know, being a little bit. It's more entertaining when bands don't just like play a song and then stop. They're trying to figure out and get ready for the next. It's like I think the part about the shows that are performance or entertainment is like, oh yes, people there's some value to that I didn't pay attention to back when I was younger. We will probably play a similar set, although for most shows. We'll see. There's a, you know, we are ready to play more songs than we will play. So I imagine we'll switch some things up. There's a couple songs that I would really like us to be able to play, but yeah, we can't play yet. But yeah, I just, you know, I'm just thinking back to playing at the Locomotive 10 years ago in Bologna, and how, yeah, I really enjoyed that show so much. It was fun to play fun to play songs with Chris that we had only played with Doug. So songs from the White Birch, like Lost Leader, which we had not played. You know, we actually wasn't in the band's repertoire when we were playing with Chris. That was fun to do with him. And we've also been practicing Washed Up, which was another song from the White Birch that Chris had not played when he was in the band. So yeah, we'll see.
Okay. And after these first dates in the US, is there anything that you realize you were missing, being on tour, pre-show moments, sharing more time between you?
I live about 3 blocks away from John, so we see each other a fair bit anyways, and often see Chris when he is in town playing. But yeah, I really like spending time with John and Chris. So that's that's a really nice added benefit to doing it. And we were having dinner, the 3 of us, after practice. We're having dinner with a friend, and I was saying, oh, it's so nice to be with John and Chris. I mean, I know, it's like they bother me in the same ways they always did. And I'm sure I bothered them in the same ways I always did. And then I forget if it was John or Chris was like, some new ways too.
That's true.
And if you agree, I would like to take a step back, if you don't mind. So the question is, at the time of the release of Freddy Stars, mainly, did you had the impression that you had created something really important, really that's something that would remain in the years? How do you remember those times?
Sure, I'll start with this. I think, you know, one of the things that happens when you're, like, for many bands at least, and when a record company wants to release your records, they, at least traditionally, had been, all right, we'll lend you some money to record the record, which you will earn back at a very low rate, and we will own your recordings in perpetuity. And when I had gone to college, I, you know, had read, I knew on paper what in perpetuity meant, but I had no idea. At, you know, 25, I had no idea what in perpetuity actually would be like. The idea that I would do something at age 25 that I would then be interacting with in my 50s. First of all, I couldn't imagine my 50s. Let alone my 40s. I could barely think of my 30s. And so the idea that we would be making something, I thought what we were making was important and precious, and something I thought about just all the, you know, nonstop. But I didn't think about it as having duration over time. And so it was very surprising to me over the years that the music and the recordings have stayed, at least for some people, and become for some people meaningful and a source of solace. So I'm gratified that that it turned out to be that way, but I certainly had no idea when we were doing it. I was really focused on the importance and the value of it then, but I couldn't understand in perpetuity. I still probably can't, but even like 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, I couldn't understand those things.
Okay.
I will just say,
okay.
I'm sorry.
No.
Okay. I was going to say, when we recorded that, we had just played a small number of, I think we had only played 2 shows ever. We had probably only played together, including practices, maybe 10 or 12 times.
Wow.
And then we recorded the record in our friend Mike McMackin's apartment. And so it just seemed like it was the very first thing that we did, basically, was to make this record. But we knew that it sounded, it sounded, considering what some of the other records coming out of New York at that time sounded like. I think it was just, start thrashing around and making a lot of noise and yell. And so I think our record always stood out amongst the others. And also just the fact that when we started playing shows, while the audience might not be that interested, I think most of the other bands who we were playing with really kind of took notice. And one of the things we discovered was that a lot of bands would say, like if we were playing more than one show, they would say, hey, I wrote a song last night. It's kind of like a Codeine song. So I feel like there was an immediate response from other bands. And so, I don't think any of us thought, oh, we'll start a number of bands that start to play more like us. But that was something that I think was taking place from the very start.
Thank you. And John, Stephen, thinking back to the early 19th, do you think there was a scene in those years that Codeine was a part of? There were bands with which you had found points in common, or that did you feel close both in attitude and in spirit?
I certainly did. I mean, I remember getting like a cassette from Red House Painters very early on. They had a really interesting cover of the American national anthem, among other things, on this demo. I listened to San Francisco band Swell, and I knew, pretty not super shortly, not kind of close to after us, when Low started playing music. I thought Low was great, and I really liked Galaxy 500 too. But the New York scene that we were in, we were friends with bands that were indie bands, but I didn't. So there was kind of a social scene, but I didn't necessarily feel like we were part of a big aesthetic scene. I don't know. I mean, there were other bands like Slint, which I thought was an amazing group. We had toured with Bastro, very different kind of band, but also one that's very aesthetic, thinking a lot about aesthetics. So I didn't feel like we were alone. I think we had shared values with a bunch of those bands, but musically we were trying to do something different.
Okay.
I do recall Steve, Steve was very friends with a number of people out in Louisville, Kentucky. And, the big get together in Louisville is the Kentucky Derby. And so Steve went out there in the spring before we had actually recorded Frigid Stars. Although I'm always a little confused on the actual dates. But Steve came back and told me, he's like, you gotta see these. There's this band I saw. Their name is Slint. You are not gonna believe who these guys are amazing. Yeah. So I think there they are. Yes. Yeah. So we've always felt somewhat of a kinship with Slint. But unfortunately, they didn't stay together, and we never played any shows with them.
Maybe in the future.
Maybe, you never know.
Yeah, I remember being so impressed with Britt Walford's drumming, and even to the point where I met with Brian Paulson. I was out in the Midwest for work, and I met with Brian Paulson in Minneapolis, and he was the person that had recorded Spiderland, and talked with him about stuff. But we ended up with staying with Mike McMacken. I'm pleased that we did.
Can I ask you, because I was coming back on to what John was saying before, because I had a question about more about your sound and your way of playing on stage, because it's my opinion. I don't know if it's correct, so I'm asking you. I don't think in your opinion, is it correct to say that your sound, your suspended rhythm, so it's something fundamentally unique that hasn't been replicated in the way you did it by any other band? I mean, maybe there are other bands that played slowly and with no hurry, but I don't think that any other band has ever played like you. And there are other kind of music, like, I don't know, post-punk or grunge. There are many other bands that played like the first of doing something. But in your case, I think that no one has been able to do this. So I want to say, is it just my wrong impression, or did you see this way too?
That's a very kind thing to say, and of course, everyone thinks that their experience, their band is unique, and I can't. I think, obviously we were able to have more than one drummer, but I can't imagine having any other guitar player than John, and I think also Mike McMacken brought a lot to the sound of the record. Frigid Stars having a lot of reverb and space, Fairly Real having a lot of different textures, and then the White Birch being, I think, more dry, more spare. So that is part of what kind of contributed to, I think, hopefully some unique qualities of our recordings, and I think John's playing unique qualities to our performances. But when people talk about slowcore, and I think is a funny label.
We didn't use it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. But I do think that although we were part of we were an indie band on an indie label, I'd like to think that our music does not sound as kind of 90s as some other bands from that era do. And I think that is both our performance, but also the kind of quality of the sound that Mike McMacken was able to give our recordings.
Mhm.
John?
Yeah. No, I agree. I guess, you wouldn't want to have another band come out sounding exactly like Codeine. We're already here. So I think a lot of that is just up to the bands. I'd say, thank goodness there only is one Codeine. But yeah, there are other bands where they're doing something very similar.
And curiosity, in the past few months, we interview Steve Albini, and he was telling us that the record that changed his life was the first Ramones records. What is the records that changed your life?
Ooh, definitely a few. The first Velvet Underground record definitely changed my life.
Oh.
I consider my life as I know it beginning with the Banana album.
Yeah.
I will say one record that there's like two records. Maybe I'll mention two records that changed my life. So the first was I was a teenager. I was in a big record store back when they sold records in record stores, and I was at the cutout bin. So because I was a kid, I didn't have a lot of money, and there was two records that I was looking at. One of them was a Robert Gordon record, and with the corner cut out because it's a cutout record. The other was This Is the Modern World by The Jam with the corner cut out. So I'm looking at these two records, and this other person, an adult, who of course seemed very old to me, was like, "Oh, that Robert Gordon record is really good." So he moves on. I'm just like, I put the Robert Gordon record down, and I got The Jam's This Is the Modern World. So that was definitely one record that changed my life. And another record that changed my life was Upside Down by Jesus and Mary Chain.
Oh.
That 7-inch just blew my mind. The woman that I was with at the time, Lexi Mitchell, who went on to play bass in Seam, her mom had brought that single back from the UK, which had come out just a couple months ago.
Her
And-
mom?
Yeah, for Lexi. I mean,
Oh, okay. Sorry.
So yeah, right. I mean, like, her mom didn't buy it for herself. Her mom bought the Jesus and Mary Chain Upside Down single for Lexi, and I heard that record. First of all, I was amazed that anyone would have a Syd Barrett cover, not even just a Syd Barrett cover, but like a very obscure Syd Barrett song on the B side, Vegetable Man. But the A side was just incredible, and the simplicity, and while in some ways it's a minimal, I see it like the musically minimal, sonically maximal, but musically minimal. That record was just that was an amazing record to me, and yeah, so I'll leave it at those two records. This Is the Modern World, and Upside Down, back with Vegetable Man by the Jesus and Mary Chain.
Jesus and Mary Chain return to play in November. And
Oh, really?
yeah.
In Italy, yeah. And so we have maybe a last one question, and that is, are you personally a frequenter of the music scene where you live? Are you trying to stay up to date on what's happening in the music world or not? And just a curiosity, do you still go to concerts and listen to new records?
You know, not as much as I used to. But yeah, you know, you still see bands that are you think are just doing something no one else has done. I actually, you know, there's a bit of an arc. So and then of course the pandemic put a stop to everything. But I've really I think Deerhoof is an incredible band, and I've seen them a number of times. Uh, and a few other bands that I've been pretty into. But yeah, there's a, you know, it's not like, you know, it was 30 years ago when you just pick up the local paper and see which bands were in New York and go out to see them. I have to be a little more selective. At this point, you know, I think going out past 8 o'clock is you have to be prepared.
Yeah.
For me, I think like there's kind of like a couple changes have happened in my listening. I think I became a lot less interested in hearing male singers, and so I've spent a lot of time kind of since then, I think, listening more to records with women singers. But about, I don't know, 12, 13 years ago, I started listening to more metal sounds, and a lot of it initially kind of black metal. In fact, I even was kind of so taken with black metal that I put out an LP by an Italian black metal band, Ovscum, from Fano, Italy, which didn't. No one seemed to. I have a lot of them in my closet still, but I'm very pleased with the Ovscum record. And I've gone to, you know, I see a lot of, I don't go to metal as much as some people do, but there's a death metal festival in Baltimore that I've been to a bunch of times. You know, I went and saw, I'm trying to think who I saw most recently. Oh, I saw Merciful Fate, Creator opening up for Merciful Fate. So that was amazing. So yeah, probably listening to more metal these days than other stuff. So you know, yeah, that's I listen to more metal these days, and then also Aki Kawada, but that's been a constant for Japanese singer. That's been a constant for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So
Thank
more,
you.
I'm more. I think listen to more contemporary stuff than John does, although John is a big Wet Leg fan, and
Yes,
I'm
I am.
not me.
I
And
don't care what Chris Brokaw has to say about them. He's just being a grouchy old man.
A hater.
and John, Stephen, we have come to the end, and thank you for this very interesting interview. And we are happy that you shared your time with us and for talking with us about your music. And we are proud of that. And see you live in Bologna on 5 of September. Thank
Look
you.
forward to seeing
Thank
you.
you so much. Thank you for doing this interview. I'm sorry that I don't have any Italian to give my thanks to, but yes, thank you so much.
Mille grazie.
There you go.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Bye.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Bye bye.
See you.
Take care.
Thank you. You too.
Vabbè, vabbè, è
Bene,
andata, dai, 45 minuti,
molto
perfetto.
perfetto, sì, infatti.
O no?
Molto, molto bene. No, erano anche molto alla mano e non ci sono stati mai nessun momento di attrito, perché avevo terrore che fossero un po' in tensione, non so, con Chris. Sai quando si sciolgono le band e poi si